Devil, my friend. Fashion. Things to wear. Possibly faces covered, but more importantly, covering up the bodies. Merch. We have that now. We are very, very excited to announce that Vampire and the Devil have partnered with our friends at Rock and Horror Apparel. They are now taking care of the actual merch, the exclusive merch for the Vampire and Devil podcast, modeled by our very sexy devil right here.
Oh, yeah.
But we have all kinds of goodies to share with you.
Got the hoodies. We got some shirts. We got some tanks coming up. We got some booty shorts. We got all the stuff you want to wear from the Vampire and Devil podcast, thanks to Rock and Horror.
Horns up. Fangs out. Devil, my beloved, it's been a little while since you and I have gotten to talk about a showdown that's not kind of a showdown, but it is. But it isn't. And this being vampires versus werewolves, a topic it's probably a little overdue for us to talk about, and something a little bit more in depth, my friend. Could be something down the line that I think we could have a lot of fun with, but that's not what this is all about. Because fact of the matter is, Fangs and Infernos. This one is for you, Devil. Tell them about the alphabets of horror.
Yeah. So we did the poll, and surprisingly, it was between Underworld, and we did have Urban Legends, and I was actually kind of shocked. I figured Urban Legends would have probably taken a little bit over Underworld, but Underworld got some legs, and apparently people like seeing werewolves. They like seeing vampires. They like seeing Kate Beckinsale in her Matrix outfit. They like seeing Scott. I mean Scott Stapp. I mean Scott Speedman. I always every time I see him, I think of him as being Scott Stapp the whole entire time. I'm waiting for him to come out with arms wide open. He has that. He had that very Scott Stapp kind of look to him
He
a
does.
little bit. But yeah, I mean, it's like I said, we're gonna talk a little bit about Underworld, and like I said, it was at a time. I mean, we're gonna get into the meat and potatoes of the movie. There's definitely some pros and some cons of the film.
Yeah.
My I would say probably my favorite part of the whole entire movie, for at least 90% of the movie, is the fact that the werewolves are real people in suits. It's all like animatronics. It's
Yeah.
very suit. I mean, there are definitely some scenes, obviously when the werewolves are crawling against the walls and shit like that. You have a little bit of CGI and, a couple here and there, when they're wolfing out, obviously a little bit of that is. But for the most part, I like the fact that this movie, was still using that practical effects in a world where vampire and, werewolf movies at that time were strictly just all full CGI. So, I mean,
Yeah.
that's the one thing I'll definitely praise about it. Now, everything else, okay, there's some other issues with that. I mean, I do love me, Sir Vampire Bill Nye in this movie and stuff like that in it. So I think that's
Yeah.
cool. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, it's I mean, I'm not gonna complain about it, because yes, seeing Kate in the leather, not leather, but the vinyl suit
Vinyl.
isn't bad looking. But yeah, I always was like, it's the second rate Wish version of the Matrix and stuff like that. But they gotta sell a little bit of her. Obviously she's a looker, and you gotta
Yeah.
throw a little bit in that. So I get it. But yeah, let's talk about some werewolves and talk about some vampire brothers. Your vampire brothers, you know, at least some of them were. The guy was a dick.
He
This
was.
guy in this movie was a complete asshole, man. And we'll talk about him. Damn vampires screwing it up. But I did like the fact that they talked about the other vampires, and they're apparently the one vampire is supposed to be reigning while the other ones are sleeping underground and stuff like that. And that's how they can live for centuries. So I thought that was a cool idea.
Yeah, no, I definitely did like that. Again, whether it be in the coffin nail segments, but also when it comes to, us discussing it as well. If there's a vampire movie in whatever it is we're talking about, everybody knows at nauseum how particular I am on vampiric lore because I just think it's incredibly important. And the thing about it is simply enough. I'm all for interpretations. I'm no censor. They're not my movies. They're not my books. They're not my anything when it comes to whatever it is you and I may be talking about. But when it comes to like how you want to make a change that's always been considered a certain way, it's like what they said to us back in school. Well, when you and I showed up to school, if we weren't, vamping out or setting people on fire, it's about showing your work. I'm down for your interpretation. I'm down for your vision. I'm down for your cause. Got to show your work though. Like going back to when you and I were talking about, oh, for fuck's sake, like Vampiros Lesbos, like how you're going to have vampires sunbathing by the pool as just like a commonality thing drive me absolutely fucking crazy. As well as other movies that I talked about in like my coffin nail segments, whether it came with like apocalyptic type thing or like vampires out in the sunlight or trying to survive or do this, that, and the other thing. But that's a tangent for another time. But anyway, that's my particular thing. The one of the pros I found about this movie is I did like the idea of how the vampires went from generation to generation. I did like that. I thought it was very well done. I thought they did show their work, and I did feel that it made sense. The funny thing about it is, you and I went slightly different directions when it came to watching this movie to prep for this. I remember watching this movie in the theater back in 2003, I think, when it came out and leaving the theater pissed. Like, look, we all love Kate Beckinsale. That was fine, but it was also right about the time, if not the time, that I got super pissed off at trailers and stopped watching them completely. And that was because that was one of the movies I definitely remember just showed too much. It showed all these great action scenes. Her gun blowing the circle around herself to fall down through, which I thought was great. Um, but the trailer showed all this cool like action when in reality, and I don't personally think this is an overall argument you can make about a movie that ultimately was a love story. It had a little bit of that Romeo and Juliet. Damn, dare I say, Tromeo and Juliet feel. Just throw back to our friends in Tromaville. But no, it had that kind of Romeo and Juliet feel where, Kate is already herself. She's established, she's part of this world, and then the love interest and Scott kind of comes into it. And I didn't hate the fact that they had this love connection. I get it. It's cool. It's all for it, especially when it comes to like vampires in cinema. When it comes to my brethren, love and relationships are a big part of our culture. But when the trailer was so dominantly showing this, kills, action. There was a big chunk of the movie that was just this love story, them chilling out in like this kind of barn feel setting that I was like, I didn't love it at the time because I went in expecting my first real action-packed, vampires versus werewolves experience, and I didn't get that. As I watch this movie now, a little bit older, a few hundred years wiser, I lightened up a little bit on it because I focused in a little bit more into the history of why the vampires were able to go through different generations and what kept them strong. And that chilled me out a little bit on the love story. I still didn't love it. I was still watching that part of the movie, just kind of like, oh, here's that scene that I didn't like that very much. Not, you know, but I was able to focus a little bit more on the parts that I liked. And a movie that I would have destroyed if you and I did this show 15 years ago, well, in this case, 20 years ago, I'm a little less bitchy about, but still have my gripes. And like you and I discussed off the air, I know you're actually kind of the other side of the pendulum on that. You were more down for the cause at first, and then not so much now.
Yeah, yeah. I remember, like I said, I remember going and seeing it in theaters too. And like I said, I thought it was cool. I thought it had that like, fast paced action. I remember watching it, like that, that kind of like blade feel to it.
Yeah.
I mean, I love the fact that they had the guns that had like the piercing things that could, kill werewolves, and they had something that could kill vampires. And I love the scene where the guy was a werewolf, but then she threw those like ninja star big huge metal things in him, and he's like ripping them off and stuff like that. Even his voice, watching his voice now is, I think, it's comical, but I liked it back then. He's like, "Oh, I'm gonna talk like this like, because I'm a big huge werewolf." He's basically like the Bane version of werewolf. But yeah, I always thought that action was cool. Like you were talking about the scene. I love the fact that pop culture even used that. The scene where she's shooting herself out of the house, and she's shooting the floor behind her. The Mythbusters even used that in the scene to figure out whether or not somebody could actually shoot themselves out from a floor and stuff like that. So I love
Yeah.
how people, that movie, influenced pop culture. But yeah, yeah, you fast forward to, we watching it again now. I was like, okay, I always liked Underworld, whether or not, you know, some of the other sequels and stuff like that kind of went off the ends and stuff like that. But I always remember, the first one, I always liking it. And then, like I said, watching it now, it was like, I always remember there being a lot more action in it for some reason. I thought, like I said, I do remember, obviously all the vampire drama and stuff like that in it,
Yeah.
where you have the guy who's running the vampire world now, and he's kind of in cahoots with the Michael Sheen's character and all that stuff like that and things like that. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I always remembered that, but I don't remember it being as bulky as it
Yeah.
was before. Where like watching it this time, I was kind of like, this is starting to get a little boring now. I don't remember. Like I said, I just remember there being more action and stuff like that. But
It did have a little bit of cursed feel to it, Devil.
yeah. But like I said, so when I watched it, no. But like I said, I still enjoy it. I think it's kind of cool because apparently, like, I'm pretty sure I remember reading it that apparently Michael Sheen in character, him and Kate Beckinsale at one point were an item, and then there weren't an item anymore. But they were cool with each other and did this film. So I thought that was kind of neat that you kind of had that. And it's like I said, it's just like I said, I always just remember it being, the two main things at least the main ones that I always remember when I think of Underworld before I rewatched it again was obviously, like I said, the Kate Beckinsale and her outfit and stuff like that. Because obviously, everybody's gonna remember that and stuff like that with that tight fitting outfit that shows off a little bit. Okay, yeah, I remember that all the time. I remember a lot of the action packed. I remember like the scenes where the werewolves are climbing on the walls and the transformations and things like that. And like I said, I do remember Bill Nye's character. I always thought that was cool, where the elders were underneath the ground and
Yeah.
he had to be brought back to life with blood transfusions, sort of to bring him kind of back. And he's not really supposed to be out because there's only supposed to be, one ruler at a time and stuff like that. And this is how they keep. So I remember that, but I just didn't remember it being as much of like you said, like a Romeo and Juliet film until like, till watching it now. I'm just like, yeah, I don't, like I said, I just don't remember having that accent. And like I said, like I said, it didn't deter from me from the film. Like I said, I still enjoy it. It's something, like I said, it's something I'll watch every so often. But yeah, it was like, yeah, I was the other way around, where I remember watching it in theaters, liking it and coming back and watching it a bunch of times and liking it and stuff like that, and then having watched it in a few years and then going, man, this is really like, is it over yet? Looking at my watch and stuff like that, like kind of like, come on, let's just get to the hot action. Yeah, it was weird. Like I said, and then like I said, who, like I said, I love the, you know, the kind of science of the movie too, because they're obviously making, trying to go after Scott's character and stuff like that, and there's a reason why, because it was blood type, and then him turning, and like I said, then it obviously him being a werewolf and her being a vampire. It's just like that would never mix. I mean, yeah, I mean it's yeah, we've already I think True Blood did it better, so.
No, they definitely did for sure. So, and I mean, it's interesting though too because like this movie spawned four sequels, three sequels and a prequel technically. But like again, I think that also kind of speaks a little bit to the times. You know, Hollywood's very, very money hungry, for lack of a better term. And any kind of franchise that like garners some type of traction in any way will pretty much guarantee you a sequel, if not a trilogy. And you and I talked about this off the air. If not for the Fangs and Infernos picking this movie, had it kind of hit my radar in any other type of capacity, I might have strongly considered this for the potential of a better sequel because I again I wasn't stoked by any means when I left the theater after this movie. I didn't want my money back. It's not that I didn't have a good time. I'm always going to have a good time at vampire movies. Vampire movies I hate. I'm still going to enjoy watching a person's interpretation of my life kind of thing. Um but I definitely remember hearing about the second Underworld event and it coming out and going to the theater, one out of obligation and one out of curiosity, and leaving the theater being like, there we go. Okay, more vampire, more action, less tucking and fucking, and more about what I was expecting to get out of the first movie. You know, and I can't go into like super details because it has been a little while since I've watched the rest of the franchise, so I would have to you know, kind of reinvest in checking it all out. Which even after this, this movie, I honestly I may do. You know, we'll see. But I definitely remember being more happy about the second movie. But then, just like a lot of movies that kind of continue on, I started getting a little bit more like reserved. And then when it started getting into like Blood Wars and stuff like that, the latter part of the series, it was like, guys, you're just trying to capitalize off Kate. Not that I blame you, but Kate knows she's going to get paid. It'd be like Mila Jovovich in Resident Evil, you know? Granted, I think the Resident Evil movies overall stayed just, they stayed consistently good, you know? Some movies were better than others, but overall, I thought they kind of stayed consistently good, where Underworld, I think, became kind of a tough sell. And I do think that has to do with the fact that, like, if you're not I'm not talking about being a part of that life, being a part of that lifestyle, but if you're not a fan of the source material and you don't kind of really understand what we're about, it's a very tough movie to get to make stand strong, based off what it is. Anyway, it is an interesting movie. It's the first real Hollywooded up vampires versus werewolves movie. Of course, you've got Bela Lugosi, you've got Lon Chaney. They started it all in Universal Monsters, but you never really got that showdown. There's plenty of B-rate horror movies that are out there of people that kind of like tackled the subject, kind of tried to go there, where it was kind of like, Undertaker versus Kane for our wrestling fans, or like, that type of like, the big head honchos like finally duking it out, for like supremacy, Freddy versus Jason for our Fangs and Inferno horror fans. It was the first time that Hollywood really kind of got back behind the concept. And while I really don't think they dropped the ball, I think similar to why Freddy vs. Jason still made $1 million, like millions of dollars, man, it could have been so much more. And I think that has a little bit to do with like the curiosity mixed with the rushing to take away from the execution.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the anticipation of making this movie where you do have X amount of vampires, X amount of werewolves, and seeing them duke out and things like that. Yeah, definitely. I mean, as far as like anticipation, the anticipation of it and stuff like that, it kind of reminded me of like Predator 2 with that hidden, the very end where you see the alien skull and you're like, ooh, we're gonna get an Alien versus Predator, and then 20x years later we finally get it. We're like, ooh yeah, and then it
Oh
sucks.
no.
We're like, oh no, and they're like, oh sorry, we fucked up the ball. We're gonna make another one called Requiem. We're gonna Requiem that mistake, and I'm like, no, you just made another mistake.
Yes.
So it's like you just made it.
Dude,
You made that mistake even worse.
it literally reminds me of Brother Vampire. So like my brother was so fucking stoked for that Hulk movie. You know, the one that was called Hulk. He wouldn't watch trailers, he wouldn't watch anything. He was so amped. He's a big comic book guy. Brother Vamp is all about it. He's so fucking into this movie. Finally, an Incredible Hulk movie. He couldn't wait. I remember when he called me, he was like, dude, I went out and I saw it and I saw the Hulk movie and it absolutely sucked. He was so bummed.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, who doesn't love a little Edward Norton as the Hulk?
This was the Bruce this was
Oh, the one before that.
the one
Yeah,
before that. This was the one called Hulk. Like if
yeah,
anything, having Edward Norton, I think semi brought it back as a kind of okay movie. This was the first one that was just called Hulk, and that thing was a black eye.
yeah. So that's
But
just like
anyway,
this.
back on point.
But yeah, yeah. That's what I was saying with this is you kind of just had that feeling where it was like, yeah, you put these two huge entities and you could do it. And like I said, not like you said, not saying they dropped the ball because like I said, it's a good movie. People still like it. Obviously, people still want to talk about it because I mean, like I said, the Fangs and Infernos chose this over a couple of other good you movies. Not that you had, not that you had the strongest suit in the world, but yeah, like I said, I was expecting maybe Urban Legends just because, that typical. But I mean, like
Even
I said,
even Unhinged was in the running for a second.
yeah, yeah. So it was a couple of those good ones and stuff like that. To me, I kind of it wasn't surprised. I mean, I figured it was going to be more like that. But like you said, it's just like, the in the world of like everything else, where they had, the Blade movies, you had the Matrix movies and things like that. It was just Hollywood like saying, let's just do a vampire and werewolf movie and mix it in with that kind of stuff. And it was like, yeah, like I said it's just like even like I like it but it's still bad, but you have that Van Helsing film with Hugh Jackman, which was interesting, but overall yeah it's just a ploy on let's
Yeah.
just make a lot of money off of something that people are going to sell. And it's like I said, I mean,
That
even
movie
without.
strangely brings me so like a lot of joy, actually.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, obviously, people are like I said, people are going to go to the theaters because it's a vampire and werewolf movie, so
Yep.
that's going to be that. Then you add the extra sell of Kate Beckinsale and her outfit, so that people, the guys are going to be like, hell yeah, let's go see this because she's freaking wearing a Catwoman kind of suit like look thing. So it's like, hell yeah, I mean, it worked. Yeah, like I said, it worked for Michelle Pfeiffer. It worked for I can't remember her name, but the chick from The Matrix and stuff like that worked for her. So
Oh,
why?
yeah.
It's like
I,
why not? Why
uh,
not? Why not? Why don't we try it?
yeah, we'll just call her Trinity because
Yeah,
I know exactly who you're talking about, and I'm
but
drawing.
yeah, it's like it was like yeah, we know that works. So it's like yeah, I mean, like you said. So like I said, overall, it's still like I said, it's an entertaining movie. It's not that bad. It's not to the point where I'm gonna turn it off or I'm like, oh, I gotta watch this movie. Like, and just sit through. It's one movie that I can sit through. It's just that, like I said, I just remember it having a lot more. For some reason, I remember the action more
Yeah.
than the softer side. But like I said, overall, I mean, Hollywood's gonna do it. Surprised they haven't redone Underworld, a reboot of it or something like that.
Yeah, hopefully they just don't. I just think
This
it's
is
best. Again, it's a five movie franchise, you know, three, four sequels and technically three sequels and a prequel. So it's like I think they should just kind of let it as is. And just like you said, Devil, you hit it on the head. Like again, I was more on top of that softer side right from the get-go, but then revisiting it allowed me to explore the other avenues of like what I like to look for and stuff like that. So it kind of like warmed me up a little bit. Again, if you and I were doing this review 20 years ago, this movie for me is going to get like a fucking five. But it's going to be a nicer review, which we're about to get into because it is time for the obituaries, but it's going to be a nicer thing, but it's not going to be all that either. And again, the sequels, they just kind of were what they were. It was a little bit squeezing blood from a stone, but it was just kind of what it was. And at the same time, it is still Kate Beckinsale in like a pleather, rubber type Catwoman suit, which doesn't exactly suck. So I mean, that's kind of awesome. Or in this case, it kind of does, but in a good way. So anyway, Fangs and Infernos, it's about that time, and Devil and I are going to get into the obituaries. So let's talk a little bit about this, despite the fact that we've kind of covered it all. Like overall, I don't hate it as as a movie. I don't hate it as an attempt at the culture clash. Um, I want to give this movie a seven for respect to it. Officially, my stance is going to be a 6.5. I really don't hate the feedings. The fangs, the kills. It's actually we didn't even really discuss that, but it's a high kill count, which definitely doesn't suck. So there's a good amount of blood when it comes to this movie. But again, while I did lighten up on this movie because I enjoyed the exploration of why the vampires are able to carry on from generation to generation, and I honestly didn't hate the transfusion storyline. I thought that was a very unique take. Again, if you show your work, if you have a way to kind of present the product, I don't I don't hate your vision and I will support it. So I didn't hate the idea and the delivery of that. I thought it was kind of interesting because even in the Blade franchise, there was a harvesting situation that they did cover in one of the movies. So I didn't hate that. But again, I I still am a bit on my stance of being sold out by trailers versus actual movie. And I did like the action. I liked the kills, the fangs, the feedings, the I liked the visual of like the elder characters, like Bill's character. It worked for me. I thought it was solid. But again, that solid love story, which works, but was extended in a way that I didn't think needed to go as long as it did, is part of what does hurt the overall presentation of this movie. So while I did like the sequel and I did think that the second Underworld is better than the first one, I'm still going to stand on my stance at a 6.5 for this.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, like I said, I mean, like I said, when it comes to this film, like I said, I've always kind of had like that, like I said, that love hate for it. Like I said, to me, I always felt like it's a fun enough movie. Like you said, if you compare it to some other ones and stuff like that. I mean, even like to me, like Resident Evil, like we talked about that being that Resident Evil for me was a more of an upset for me because the fact that I was such a high into the video games and the IP and the fact that
Sure.
George Romero's, version of it would have been more amazing. But like I said, for this, you kind of, it's not an IP, even though it is, vampire and werewolves, that kind of stuff. But it is an original film and things like that. So like, yeah, I mean, I always felt like, it's like I said, it's a fun enough movie. Yeah, but like I said, I'm probably with you. I'd probably maybe go, like that 6.5, 7.02. Like I said, I mean, yeah, you have Kate Beckinsale that bumps it up a little bit, but and then you have the Wish version of Scott Stapp over there, with arms wide open over
I
here
mean, if
trying
Kate
to.
Beckinsale bumps it up to a 7. Devil, I'm not going to fight you for it.
Yeah, so I mean that's where I would probably go. I mean, like I said, I think like yeah, overall movie wise, it's fun. Like I said, and I will bump up. Like I said, I will bump it up that 6.5 to 7, only because of, like I said, a lot of the practicality of the effects of the movie. Where I remember
That's
watching
fair.
the behind the scenes, where it was people in like I said, the people in werewolf suits and costumes and prosthetics and some kind of animatronics and stuff like that partly in it. So I mean, granted, yes, there is still a lot of CGI in the film. Obviously, it's needed for the subject matter, but I still love the fact that they did use a lot of practicality when it came to the film. So yeah, I mean, I'm cool with a 7.0. I think 7.0 is like shitting on it enough, but not too much.
Absolutely. Nope, sounds good. So that's the way it's going to be, Fangs and Infernos. Based on everything that Devil talked about, we're going to pull me up a little bit as well. And we're going to collectively agree when it comes to Underworld. For the alphabets of horror, letter U that you guys chose, we're going to go with a 7.0 when it comes to this one. So it's got a little bit of that fun factor to it. It's a solid enough movie, which it is. But again, Devil and I completely stand on our gripes and our situations when it comes to that. But that's the way it's going to be there, Fangs and Furrows. 7.0 for the obituaries for Underworld in the letter U for the alphabets of horror, voted on by you guys. We appreciate you guys so much, always supporting everything that me and the devil have to show and have to offer. And we look forward to being back with you very, very shortly. Show a lot of love and also a little bit of happy birthday love as of the recording of this episode to our beloved Mark Hall, co-owner with Lizzie Borden of Rock and Horror Apparel, which is exactly where you can go to get all of your merch for the Vampire and Devil podcast, is right at rockandhorror.com. If you like your tea, absolutely go check out our friends at Brutalities. And if you like it hot, just like the devil, remember Coney Island Saucery is a great place to go for amazing hot sauces, various levels of heat, various levels of flavor, and of course that Vampire and Devil discount code to get you guys some love and save you guys a little bit, in the words of the devil, a little bit of cheddar for you. And of course, if you're looking for a place to lay your head, please support and check out our friend Chris, who owns the, as you know, as you say, it's all about Buffalo Bill, baby. The Buffalo Bill House, which is now a fantastic, like, motel, bed and breakfast style. It's fantastic. Devil and I have been there with Mrs. Devil and Mrs. Vamp. It's fantastic. And of course, please support independent businesses like Twist and Vines when it comes to horror decor, but also museums to allow us to educate, show all kinds of cool things and great things. And our friend John with the Salem Witchboard Museum, as well as the Witchboard Museum of Baltimore. But that's the way it's going to be. Myself and the devil are going to sign off for this one. 7.0 again for Underworld, for letter U on the alphabets of horror. Horns up, fangs out. Devil, my friend, I think it's time that we spill the tea. Brutalities. Vampire and Devil podcast couldn't be more excited, more humbled to let you all know that we have partnered with very dear friends of ours for a long time in Brutalities. And there's so much great stuff, so many flavors, so much to enjoy, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about it. Isn't that right there, my friend?
Oh yeah, we like it hot. Of course, the Inferno likes it hot. Do you like the hot tea? Well, you might as well get some brutality. Yeah, horror movies, puns, rock and roll. Brutality's got it all.
Absolutely. When it comes to the vampire, you know that he's going to absolutely gravitate towards that Nosferatu or that Nosferatu brew. Absolutely a favorite of mine. And we got to show a little bit love to, by all means, the biggest franchise in horror right now. That would be Terrifier. So Brutalities has brought you Terrifier. But that's just from the vampire. The devil has some favorites of his own.
Oh yeah, do you like the movie Pumpkinhead? Well, how about a little pumpkin bread for your throat holes? And like I said, with the rock and roll fans and the horror fans, Wednesday 13 fans, do you like Wednesday 13 and tea? How about a couple of those? With the Summertime Suicide and a couple other ones too. So if you like Wednesday 13 and you like the tea and you like the brutalities,
go to the website.
Absolutely. And so, of course, we like to look out for those that look out for us. We love you, Fangs. We love you, Infernos. But as a courtesy from Brutalities to be bestowed on you, we have that Vampire and Devil coupon code, don't we, my friend?
Oh yeah, you want to save a little dough, little cheddar, maybe buy some more shit? Go on the line, Brutalities, type in Vampire and Devil, and you get 10% off your order. Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So it's getting into the chilly weather. People need to warm their bones. They need to warm what little skin they may or may not have. But Brutalities is the way to get it done. So that's the way it's going to be because Vampire and Devil said so. Horns up, fangs out for Brutalities. Devil, my friend, I think we should have a little quick conversation about everybody's respectful celestial abodes, where it be my little coffin where I lay my head at night, or at times that you feel that you just want to go back down to make sure that hell's not getting out of whack while you are away. Let's talk about it. Vampire and Devil's newest partnership in Twisted Vines, our dear friends, Chris and Sarah and Cadaver.
Oh yeah, you like scary stuff, you like horror decor, come and check out Twisted Vines. They make all the kind of cool shit, all for your house, all kinds of scary shit. They love it. You like to bring back the horror, you want to scare your neighbors, you want to conjure up a friend to talk to, you want to conjure up somebody bad, you want to do some bad stuff to them, you go to Twisted Vines and get some of their merch.
Absolutely, for sure. Everything is completely handmade by them. So if you need a little friend, maybe a round set abode, maybe you want to conduct a little evil towards a friend that was a friend, maybe no longer a friend. They have voodoo dolls they can do for you to allow for such activities. But you know how much we love our Ouija boards, my friend, and they make all of those by hand. They took care of your beloved vampire with a nice Nosferatu board, but the devil, he happens to be a Munsters fan. And not only do they do boards as traditional rectangles, but they can put a little bit of coffin flair in them.
Oh yeah, look at that coffin shape monster board. Yeah, you wanna conjure up Mr. Herman? You wanna ask him how Pet Cemetery was? You can do it on this board. Oh yeah.
Absolutely, my friend. So again, thank you so much to Twisted Vines for partnering with the Vampire and Devil podcast, and make sure that you Fangs and Infernos are checking them out on their Facebook page, on their Instagram pages, and making sure that you are checking them out as they move around the country, showing their craft off at all of the various horror cons and oddities expos that they love to do. So absolutely, my friend, of course, man, horns up, fangs out for our friends at Twisted Vines.
Oh yeah.
What's up? It's the devil here again, and we're gonna talk about movies with the devil in it, and we're gonna continue some funny ones. This is the end. Oh yeah, I like this movie. It was great. It's got all these actors playing themselves, or maybe playing themselves, playing with themselves. Seth Rogen, James Franco, Jonah Hill. Oh yeah, and the devil's in it. The power of Christ compels you. Oh, does it really? Oh yeah. But then the devil comes out, and the devil's got some big schlongs, and then the bigger devil comes out, and he's even got a bigger schlong, and it's the rapture, and we're gonna take them all. And guess what? I'm gonna say a spoiler, because if you haven't seen this movie yet, what are you thinking? Anyway, it's got Channing Tatum as a gimp pimp. Oh, Danny McBride putting it in the backside. Anyway, go out and check out This Is the End, because the devil said so, and if not, you're going to hell.
Go. All right there, Fangs and Infernos. We are the uninvited. Provoke us if you dare. That would be devil. That would be vampire. We are coming at you unprovoked. But you know what? Because we know that you guys like what we do and you wouldn't be watching us if you don't, we're totally invited, because you know I can't come in unless invited. But there's a reason why you guys get the cutesy little monologue, because this is going to be a very, very fun discussion for myself and my beloved devil to have as we get to talk about haunted houses, as we put up A Tale of Two Sisters up against The Orphanage. It's going to be a good one, Devil. This was a fun one, man. This was kind of cool, as we could like tackle like haunted house style, like semi-European but dominant American style up against like a Korean style of haunted house movies. And the one thing I also like about the idea of one of the movies is the way that it was kind of put together. Was it going straight forward? Was it kind of going backwards. We're going to break into a little bit of that soon enough. But yeah, man, A Tale of Two Sisters up against The Orphanage. Let's talk a little haunted houses.
Yeah, it's a little bit, a little bit of foreign haunted house time. It's a little bit maybe like East versus West, but then again, I think they're probably both in the West now that I think about it, because the one's Spain and not Mexico. But
Yeah,
whatever, whatever.
but I
You
just
know,
mean the one movie like The Orphanage, it's got the design of that movie still has kind of a touch of American style to it, where you could
yeah.
definitely tell that A Tale of Two Sisters is very Asian.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, they definitely. I mean, when it comes to like you said, the American world is no stranger of taking foreign films and remaking them. They actually did make a remake of The Orphanage eventually, called The Uninvited. I think it
Yep.
came out a few years later. But yeah, you know how it is. It's definitely I'm kind of surprised that they haven't. Made with the explosion of the Korean horror and things like Ringu and things like that, The Ring, and all the remakes that we've had from the American one. I'm kind of surprised they didn't make a Tale of Two Sisters. As far as I know, they haven't made an American version of that movie. But then again, I think if you translate that movie into an American film, it would just be really weird. It's a very weird film, which we will get into. So, but like I said, it's a little bit of a bit of spooky, a little bit of both cultures have a different way of explaining ghosts and different things
Yeah.
like that. So, it's fun. It's like we could do our strictly just regular haunted house, but it's fun doing a little bit of the different form stuff, different cultures, and how they deal with ghosts, or how they interact with ghosts, or how they even see ghosts. So
Yeah.
it's always cool to see to see these different styles of cinematography when it comes to ghost and or haunted houses.
Yeah, man, 100%, brother. So, like, let's jump a little bit into A Tale of Two Sisters. It's obviously it's an Asian movie. It's a Korean style movie. It's very, very cool. It's centered around. I'm terrible with names, especially like foreign names, so I'm just going to keep it like simple. But it's based around these two sisters that are like kind of coming back home after like a stint in like mental institution, or like self-harm relief, or just a care facility. It's just however kind of it's like sort of described and sort of confirmed, but at the same time never really specific. So it's like more of that kind of like asylum-y type self-care type design. But anyway, these two sisters are coming back home. They've got this pretty solid relationship with their father, but at the same time, it's got a rocky feel to it. But I do also feel to a certain degree that's kind of a staple of like Asian horror. And again, not pretending in any way to be a specific, you know, aficionado of Asian horror movies, but also not even claiming to be specifically educated in just Asian family culture, obviously, is that I do feel that that style of just kind of gruff, very business-like father figure is kind of a staple when it comes to a lot of Asian cinema. I feel like that's definitely something that's used more often than not. Not necessarily in a bad way, but I do think it's just kind of a staple of culture, but also definitely a staple I feel strongly when it comes to like their horror movies. And then he's got, his wife. However, the stepmother, because you do come to learn that their mother has since passed away. And the sisters definitely have this kind of, you know, toughness in readjusting, almost kind of like a military person who's now become a civilian. You can see there's an adjustment period happening involving like being back in the proper, just being a civilian, just being back in normal everyday life, that they're having a hard time like that they're struggling with, kind of having a hard time grasping as they kind of get used to all of that. And they're trying to like have these nice, just proper dinners, but the conversation's really awkward and they're feeling like they're seeing things or being grabbed by things. And of course, like dad doesn't understand. He's not, he's kind of looking at it as like, why are you acting this way? Calm down, you're back home, stop embarrassing me, and things of that sort. Where the stepmother is trying to kind of be that respectful motherly type figure, but also mixed with a little bit of that kind of Lizzie Borden aspect where it's like, she's still the stepmother. She's not well received by the daughters.
Yeah, yeah, it's such a weird beginning because like it's one of those ones where like I mean, if you've seen the film or if you haven't seen the film, you kind of maybe not notice it, but you kind of notice it a little bit. But it kind of has that feel of like like the Sixth Sense or something like that. You kind of can just tell like in the beginning before we start confirming things and like that something's up. You know what I mean? There's the stepmom is interacting with the two girls, but the dad really you only ever see him interact with the one girl and you're just kind
Yeah,
of like, okay, maybe this. You kind of, you can kind of, if you're looking into it a little bit about what the story is like, you're like, okay, maybe this is a ghost story, blah blah blah. So you kind of figure it out a little stuff. But I thought it was kind of neat though that like throughout this whole movie, you're kind of thinking in one way, like, okay, maybe this is it, and then okay, maybe it's not. Then it's like, then all of a sudden you see more interactions, and you're like, okay, maybe maybe the daughter, the other sister is real. Maybe she's not a figment of imagination because she's playing games, and you see her interact with the stepmother, and they're playing games and doing things, and she's being rude, being mean, or disciplining them, and you're like, okay, so now I scrap that idea that the other daughter might be real then you start like you said you start getting the delusions that they keep seeing these figures and these just different weird things keep on happening throughout the house and that's what I like about this movie. It's definitely like even though it kind of does fit into this haunted house kind of theme and it's considered a haunted house movie when you look when you go and you look Google like haunted house horror films. It's definitely one on there, but it's to me, I like it because it starts off and it kind of makes you kind of feel like it's a haunted house. But then as you
yeah,
start getting into the movie, you start realizing that a lot of this is like more psychological madness and like, it's definitely a lot of like delusions and things aren't really what it is. And maybe
yeah,
like, these characters are playing off stuff and this person's thinking of things. And then it kind of gets, from the Sixth Sense, it starts getting more into like Fight Club kind of feel to it or you're not
yeah.
100% sure like okay maybe are these things are you seeing it through this other person's eyes or is that eyes or like that. So it's kind of cool. I like the way that it kind of starts off before it gets into the into the meat and potatoes when we start getting into like the actual like scares and things. And that's one thing about this movie too is it's not particularly very gory. It's not a very.
Oh,
It's definitely a slow burn film versus some of the other like I definitely wouldn't put it into the even though they still market it as the Asian extreme that Korean extreme horror films. It's
yeah.
not in that same. It's not in that same realm where you get a lot of like super gory and super disgusting, like Audition and like we talked about Ichi the Killer and
Yeah.
things like that, where you start getting into the gore. This is definitely more of like your psychological horror. It's definitely like, even when you're watching it, you're not 100%. You're like you said, you keep on thinking that, okay, maybe this is real, or maybe you're seeing this, or they're not seeing that, or maybe did that really happen, or did it really not happen? It kind of like messes with your psyche throughout the whole entire time you're watching it.
It's got a much more Ringu Grudge kind of feel to it that's standard, like demonic jump scares. Are you seeing it? Are you not kind of Asian design? Like, yeah, I definitely don't find it to land overly heavy in the Asian extreme. Although again, and I think even my because I have a physical copy of the movie. Even I think my physical copy of the movie, I think also even has
Yeah,
that
it's got that
line
tartan
on, like
extreme. Yeah.
right at the top, the black background with I think like yellow writing or something.
Yeah, yeah, it says like tartan extreme or something like that because
Yeah.
it's looped into that like that extreme Korean. But like I said, I
Does
really
does
wouldn't
yours
put
have
that.
that too?
Yeah, I would really, like I said, I really wouldn't put that into the ones versus most of the other ones that usually have them are very extreme. It's
Yeah.
super graphic, super gory. There's a lot of like to it. Well, this is, I mean, it definitely does have some of that in it. there are some scenes in this movie that are kind of like, got that little bit of horrific, ness to it and stuff like that. But yeah, it's definitely not the extreme versus some of the other ones that are, in that like, criteria.
Yeah, no, absolutely, for sure. And I mean, and it starts off in that same very, very cool way when you start getting into those scenes. I mean, I love the first real one you get with like the girl, like, or the potential mom or whatever, but just the blacked out demonic character, like under the, like under the sink or under the, like, table, or like, you know what I mean, Devil. Like it's
Yeah,
just like the
on the counter or
under the
something.
under the counter, under the cabinet, that just kind of like, when they're trying to handle this kind of like dinner thing, and then they're like, you know, she's seeing something, and she's like try and she goes to like check it out, and she like definitely sees it. Kind of reminds me a lot of like The Conjuring, with the when the demon was on the top of the wardrobe, but
Yeah.
obviously they're down by the feet. But like, where like she sees it, and then she goes and she's like turns around and is like it's not there, but then it reaches out and grabs. It's a good solid scare to kind of open up, because even as somebody, and I'm not specifically talking about like you or I that are like, very into horror movies, and are, you start noticing things when a jump scare is probably coming. And this has a bit of that build though too, where like she saw it, but now it's not there, but you still kind of know it's coming at some point. But it's still a good one. It's well timed, it's well designed, it makes sense, especially with the way that they're building up the story to it. So I really like the way that they did that. And it leads into like the other like various like intricacies of like how these sisters are reacting to things, because you've got the main sister who comes across as like the older sister, the more authoritative, at least in the father's eyes, considering that's the only person he's really willing to talk about. He treats his second daughter like this kind of redheaded stepchild, like you're just here, but you're kind of the bane of my existence, and you're so fucking needy, and blah blah blah, and yada yada yada. And it's just kind of this weird thing where you can see that like the sisters, they look out for each other, they want to love on each other, and the like I said, the older sister, as I'm kind of proclaiming her, like wants to be that protective thing, doesn't want to keep taking the abuse, but kind of has to, while trying to like protect, but also understand, as both of them are getting used to this. And then the stepmom's trying to play like the motherly aspect, but the younger sister has got this comatose, just kind of whipped, almost like, I'm not trying to like trigger anybody, but this kind of like trafficking kind of way of reacting to things, where she's just not there fully, and lives in this more like catatonic state where you don't really know how she's going to react or what she's going to do. Where once you get the older sister to react more, it's more about like, fine, or storming off, or going to these places.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and even too, like with the interactions, you see that the stepmom is like treats the two girls completely different. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, she's still kind of like the mean, mom, stepmom, the ugly stepmom, but
Yeah.
to one, she's like kind of more extreme and more physical and more yelling at the one, and then the other one, yeah, it's so weird. And like I said, with the dad, you kind of feel like, okay, yeah, this isn't you obviously find out that this isn't their mother and stuff like that. Like, okay, is this like, some younger person that they knew, or like maybe like their mother's sister or something like that? You're just kind of like, there's got to be some reason why I mean, other than the fact that they don't want this stepmom to be their mother. There's got to be another factor into why they despise the stepmom more than just your average stepmom. I know, obviously, like I said, they're gonna hate her a little bit more because it's not their real mother, and but
Yeah.
she seems a lot younger and things like that too, like too young to have, these daughters that, so she looks like maybe, like she could be like in her early 20s and the dad's way older. So it's kind of like one of those
Yeah.
things, like maybe it's like somebody that they went to, maybe the older daughter went to school with, or there's just something that, kind of goes into that. And then, like I said, obviously when it starts getting into the storyline, you start figuring out things, and you start figuring out, what happened with the mother, and the fact that, when they talk about the sister, to the father, he's like, we don't talk about her in the house. And you're like, why don't you talk about her in the house? Like, she's sitting right there at the table, the whole
Right.
entire time. And you're like, then you're like, then if you're like, what the hell's going on? Then eventually you figure out, okay, maybe there's something that happened with that, and you're finding out, this backstory with the mom, the mom dying and killing herself in the house, and then the sister gonna kind of getting trapped, and things like that, where you're not quite sure. You find out that she's passed away. Then you find out, the mental and the depression of the older girl. You find out like the stepmom isn't really the stepmom. She's kind of like a nurse that was there the whole time when her mom, but then you saw there was an interaction that looked like maybe there was something between her and the father. So maybe that's why there was this imaginative of her being there. And you don't really realize, okay, is the dad really with the woman? Because when, are they really together, or is this just a delusion in this little girl's head?
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
and
when the old pictures come into play, it
yeah.
really kind of fucks with the audience.
Yeah, so it's so weird. Like you said, you're seeing other stuff, and you're just like not quite sure. And even like when you get to the end, it's still a very like that's the one thing about me. At least I mean I feel for American audiences, which is probably one of the better things of why I don't really complain as much about them doing these Korean or Japanese films into an American culture, because some of that stuff doesn't quite just resonate with us as much. So you're kind of confused the whole entire time, even when it gets to the end where you find out more, and she ends up getting, going back into the asylum or whatever like that. You're not quite sure whether or not, yeah, you're like, like you said, you find out that the stepmom was the nurse that was there, but you're not quite sure. You're like, okay, was she there the whole time, or was she part of that? She was taking care of the mom when the mom was sick or something like that. But was there really anything between her and the father? And then, yeah, it was. When it gets towards the end and you start revealing, in most films, you kind of get like a clearer picture. I think in my opinion, it almost made it even more confusing when you started finding out the things that were happening, and you're like, okay, here's what the real story is, and you're like, wait, so that's what? Now I'm even more confused.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Devil. And that's going to play into a little bit of my final rating, which we'll get into shortly. But I love the execution of this movie, like
Yeah.
finding out that the second sister was never in the picture. She was never there. And the fact of the matter is, too, to a certain degree, never was the stepmom either. Like, yes, she's there, but when she walks in later and you think it's a different character, it's like, no, you're actually being introduced to the real stepmom now. The stepmom you had been watching for three-quarters of the movie was due to the fact that the main, like what I've been calling the older sister, is due to her basically having a split personality due to the traumas of losing her mother and then losing her sister. So she has these conversations with her sister that to her exist but don't exist to the public, which is, like we had talked about earlier, is the reason why the dad only looks like he talks to her, is because he is only talking to her. There is no secondary daughter anymore. Same thing with the stepmom. She feels like she's having these conversations with the stepmom, but she's having them in her head. They are taking place, but they're not taking place in real life, you know? And that was one of the things I thought was like just so crazy too, with the whole like, why don't you love me? Why don't you listen? Like, talk to me, bodies getting like pulled around and like trails of blood, almost Freddy Krueger, like Nightmare on Elm Street style, being left behind. Like, so much crazy stuff going on. And that's when you find out towards the end that it's based off all in your head. The mental distress, the traumas, and all of that, where dad's just trying to live his life knowing the that his daughter is just unwell and unable to cope. And it gets to the point where it's just like, this is just not going to be a thing. It's just not going to work out the way that you want it to work out. And if you pay attention close enough and you kind of pick up on it at the end, but again, that's what's also part of the very difficult part. And that's the thing I love about Asian horror movies, but also at the same time drives me absolutely bloody batty about them as well, is like they're so intricate, but they don't translate well to a foreign market. And if you look at this movie and you kind of break it down, and the director of this movie has also done interviews about it, this is common knowledge. I actually didn't really pick up on it until like it's something I had kind of wondered and noticed after I had seen the movie for about the second or third time, like a while ago. Because I don't watch this movie regularly, but I pop it in periodically because I like its design. And I started noticing things, but nothing I could like fully confirm until I actually heard it get addressed. Is this movie is shot and well, I should say is edited basically like a manga. And for the Fangs and Infernos that don't really know what that is, that's okay. If you guys have ever held an Asian comic book, it's designed to be read backwards. Designed to be read backwards for us, but that's just normally how you read a book in Asia, is you kind of read it backwards to forwards because that's just how it's done. And that was the way this movie was designed, and that was the way this movie was executed. As you're actually watching it backwards, it goes from the end game up until how it all starts, which I think is absolutely brilliant. I think it's a genius execution, but it's a very risque way of doing things for a movie that you know is going to get distributed to multiple markets. And it's a very, very tricky thing to get people to pick up on without leaving the theater or watching the movie and being so confused that they may never pick it up again. It's kind of similar to when you and I, Devil, were talking about Frailty in one of our other previous showdowns. It's a very intricately well designed execution, but it's a very, very tricky card to play because it's a tough translation.
Yeah, yeah, and it's kind of cool though now that you think about it, because like I said, I mean, it's one of those ones where like, like the movie that came out that a lot of horror fans might maybe maybe the Fangs and Infernos might know about it, but a lot of people don't know. But there was this insanely crazy horror film called Irreversible,
Yep.
and that's basically how it is you're watching this whole movie literally backwards for like 15 minutes. They show you stuff and then it goes back to the then it goes, goes so it's the end, then just 15 minutes of that, and then it goes up to that 15 minutes, and then you watch that, and then it goes back. So when you finish the movie, you're technically watching it from the beginning of the movie. So it's so cool that they
Yes.
shot it. And then apparently I heard that, there actually is they brought out a version called Reversible or something like that that's actually shot from beginning to end. So when you watch it, it's actually from beginning to end instead of backwards. So I'm like, that'd be kind of interesting. But I like that now that you think about it. I'm like, when you said that, I'm like, oh, I can kind of get that now. It makes more sense that it is written kind of that backwards where where you're getting the ending kind of first and then and then the beginning is the end. So yeah, it's kind of
Yeah.
cool. I mean, it's cool to do when people take things out of the box and stuff like that and do weird things that you're not supposed to do. I mean, like I said, I'm a huge, I mean, the biggest thing that I always talk about when you take in a leap of doing weird, stupid shit is I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and like who starts with Episode 4 as their first movie? You know what I mean? It's like you're like, what? Episode 4? This is the first movie. No, no, no. There's gonna be three before this, and you're like, well, why
It
the
took
hell?
me
Why are
so
you not
long
doing
to
that?
it took me so long, Devil, to understand that. Like I'm a Star Wars fan just like you are, but I'm by no means on your level. But growing up on those movies as well, I never understood for the longest time, as I'm sure plenty of people didn't. Like episode for a New Hope. Huh? Even when you watch the movie and you realize, Darth is this, Darth and that. Take when it comes to the first trilogy, it's like, oh, okay, but I still never understood why they didn't just do one, two, three until I realized it's like, no, we want, and we're not going to get into, I don't mean you and me, I just mean in general, Fangs and Infernos. We're not going to get into a whole breakdown of like the first, the second trilogy, the original prequels, because there's a lot of differing opinions on that. But it always used to make me go like, how is this like a thing? Like, why four, five, six? Not what? Why not one, two, three? That doesn't make any sense to me. Even though they explain, they are, Luke, I am your father, and this is your sister, and blah blah blah, and yada yada yada. That it's like, oh my God, now they're doing a trilogy that's going to explain like why Darth is Darth, like why Obi-Wan is Obi-Wan, and so on. So in the big picture, it makes sense, but then at the same time, it's like, Jesus, man, for real?
Yeah.
But overall, I love A Tale of Two Sisters. I've always been very high on this movie. So moving into the obituaries when it comes to like the scoring of this movie, in my heart, in my brain, with the way it's designed, the execution, and the stories it's telling, I fucking love it as an eight. The thing is, I do knock it down a half point personally to a 7.5, which will ultimately be my final score on this one, mostly due to the fact that like it's such a tricky design for somebody who's trying to learn this movie. Even all the way down to the ending where she's just chilling on the dock, and trying to have a normal life, like and a normal existence and thinking through where she's been and where she's going. I love all of that. But it's a very, very tough design. And while I do think the idea of putting a movie on screen in the design of reading a traditional Asian manga book is genius and kind of ahead of its time. Even though this movie came out in the 2000s, it's still 2003. This movie is still now almost 25 years old, but it's a very tough sell for foreign markets. And I do think that when you do come to whether or not people will finish a movie or go back to a movie, that is something that you do have to take into consideration. And so while I love the execution and design at the movie as an eight, due to the intricacies and the disconnect to what we've referred to multiple times as the common populace of horror fans, I just think a 7.5 is a proper score for this movie when it just comes to the translation.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely agree. I definitely agree with you on a lot of those points. I mean, for me, like I said, when it comes to like, the Korean horror and like I said, like that, that Asian, extreme films and stuff like that, and even though it's marketed on that, definitely, like you said, it's definitely more of that like J horror, that
Yeah.
Japanese horror and stuff like that. So yeah, it was kind of weird that they kind of marketed it as this Asian extreme and stuff like that. So I mean, I definitely, like I said, I definitely wouldn't put it as high as an eight even to start off with. I've always loved this film, but like compared to like some of those other Korean horror films like we talked about
Sure.
with like like we said, with Each the Killer or any of those ones, I've always put those ones a little bit higher on that level. So I
Oh
would
yeah, those
probably,
movies are 8.5s for me.
yeah, yeah. So for me, like I would probably, but like I've always been a fan of this movie. I've always been a fan. Like I said, I own the DVD. I've always thought it was really cool. I like the fact that it's kind of different. It's kind of a weird, different kind of take on a ghost story. But is it really a ghost story? It kind of is, but it kind of isn't. It's more of like, mental illness, kind of more like that. But then it's like so with all that, yeah. I mean, like the fact, I mean, with me, I'd bop it down a little bit just because it is a very slow burn.
Yes.
And then all the stuff you're talking about with it being very confusing and things like that, with as much, it's that. I mean, I probably will bump it up a little bit because, I mean, with you explaining it being like, the manga and stuff like that, with it being kind of like written like that, makes sense. I've never really been a part of that world. I've never been a huge, anime fan or any of that kind of stuff, or like, the Japanese comic books and things like that. So, but I mean, but it makes sense. Like when you said that explains it a little bit more. So yeah, I mean, for me, I would probably, maybe go with that 7.5 and then drop it down to that 7.0. So, I mean, that's about where I'm at as far as that.
Okay.
So, we'll have to figure out from, what we want to do is combined. But like I said, like I said, it's not a 7.0 because I didn't like it. It's a
Sure.
7.0 just because when you watch some of those other films that are in that same considered genre, they're not as confusing. Even the J horror ones like Ringu and Dark Water and all them, yeah, the culture is a little different, so you kind of don't understand some things because the way that they think things that, but you can still understand it and flow with it. But this one has a little bit of that lost in translation kind of feel to it, but
It
not
does.
enough. But not like I said, not enough to be like, I would not watch this movie again. Like I said, it's on my shelf. It's one of the ones that I do enjoy. So yeah, 7.0 for me.
No worries, absolutely. Yeah, and it's one of those things. It's like, it's really, and again, I'm not part of that world. I've never pretended to be, but I've got ex, vampiric brides and Mrs. Vamp, my vampiric wife, that are fans of that world. So it's more of due to my education from my past to my present is one of the reasons why I kind of started noticing things and understood things a certain way. And then when I happened to watch an interview with the director was when I was kind of like, wow, I like that. That's that's a direction that people don't go, and that's a very unique way to look at things. But again, it's a tricky way because it just does not translate unless you are a part of that world, of which you and I are not. So as of right now, Fangs and Infernos, we're going to figure it out towards the end. But right now, A Tale of Two Scissors is getting stamped on the obituaries in the ballpark of a 7.0 to a 7.5. We'll swing the needle as we see fit based on our current discussion, where we're going to get into the devil's pick. And we're going to talk a little bit about the orphanage.
Yeah, I've always been a fan of this. I found out about it when I found out that Guillermo del Toro was producing it and things like that. So I've always liked it. It kind of has a feel of his older movie called The Devil Backbone. Kind of has that feel to that, which I really love. That's one of his early films, and I've always, like I said, when I remember watching this movie, and it's definitely, like you said, it's definitely culturally different. It's one of those ones where it's a Spanish film, so obviously there's different ways that they relate with certain things. But I always found the story really really cool. It definitely, when it comes into the play of the haunted houses, it definitely is more that traditional haunted versus the Tale of Two Sisters, where it's that's sort of haunted, but it's in the head haunted, or you're not
Yeah.
quite sure whether or not it could be still haunted. Where this is definitely a little bit more of that traditional, but not completely over traditional. And I like it. I think the storyline's cool. It's about this young girl who's living at this orphanage, and she's playing with a bunch of her kids, and she's one of the to put it in light terms, these kids are, most of them are mangled up, banged up
Yeah.
mentally, maybe has some mental problems, may have some physical attributes to them that make them not the best candidates to being adopted, which most orphanage, that's what you're trying to do. You trying to get these kids to find themselves a home. And starts off with the main girl being that kind of normal girl. She looks, she's, got your traditional looking. So she's picked up, and, she gets adopted, and then, it just goes, 30 years or 25 years later, her and her husband, and they have a kid together that, she wants to, she gets, I guess, between the two of them or whatever. We never really find out what exactly they do. Apparently, they got some kind of money from either businesses or something, but they never really explain what either of them really do for work, really, as much. I think the one might be a doctor or something like that, I think, at one point, but you really never find out what she did or where they've got this money. But in long run, she finds out this orphanage that she was living at is now up for sale. So they buy this orphanage and they move in and they renovate it, and all kind of kooky and crazy things happen. She starts remembering her time when she was at this orphanage, and I always thought it was really cool. It's just got a cool imagery, especially with the different kids wearing like different masks and things like. It kind of has that like feel like Trick or Treat with the kids in that movie. It kind of feel to it, where you're not quite sure what's going on, and she's teaching teaching their son all this stuff, and they're trying to figure out how they're gonna manage to live inside this big huge. I think at one point they talked about maybe adopting, or not adopting, but bringing in special needs kids to do it, because it's such a huge house. This house has got like
Yeah.
9 billion. It's an orphanage, so it's meant to have many rooms. But yeah, it gets it's a basic story, and then it gets non-basic in a little bit.
It gets very non-basic, and it's a really, really interesting design too, because it stems around the loss of their son, but it's not about the loss of their son, as in, he, like Pet Cemetery style, where unfortunately he runs out in front of an automobile. It's like he's gone missing. Is he kidnapped? Is he lost? Is he hiding in a cupboard? Is he playing hide and seek? It's like the bottom line is like their child is missing. And as mom's doing the research and also kind of learning about the history of the orphanage, and then also trying to locate her son, where she's also not, and this one part always drove me a little crazy. It made sense in retrospect, but it always drove me a little batty, was the lack of support from her husband. Where it's like she's going nuts and super obsessed about, you know, her child missing. But then there's also the lack of marital support, of which is and craziness in that, which is stuff that we've discussed with, like, relationship turmoil under horror and distress, and and trauma. Even going back to our earliest episodes, Devil in like Antichrist, where there's always this very bizarre thing behind her wanting to find her son so badly. You've got this secondary character who I love, who's like, this older lady who's kind of got this oracle kind of feel to her, where she's just kind of always around and you don't really know if she's doing something. And then she gets like just completely brutally unalived. But then you also find out that her personal ties of the orphanage are just as deep as hers. And that's something I also always loved about this character, as you start kind of uncovering like the Easter eggs and starting to kind of piece the story together. And it ultimately has a very similar feel to me as like a movie like Silent Hill.
Yeah, yeah. And it's kind of cool because, like you said, with that mystery woman, you find out that she worked at the orphanage and things like that, and you find out that there was like I think it was her kid, or I'm pretty sure it was her kid, that was like this deformed kid that was
Yeah.
kind of hiding in secret, and nobody really knew about it and things like that. And of course, kids are going to be playing with kids, and one thing leads to another, and the deformed kid gets killed. So what mama do, like a Jason? She goes in after and kills all the other kids and things like that. And what she's trying to do, she's trying to you're figuring out, okay, she's going after the mom and things like that. You find out that this kid, that even the kid they adopted, that their kid is not even really their kid, it's an adopted kid as well too. So you're finding all these crazy little facts and little things and things like that. But it's like, yeah, we're gonna punish you for something you did because your friends did. And you're like, I wasn't even in the orphanage when all this, like I wasn't at Camp Crystal Lake when Jason freaking,
Drowned.
Jason drowned. You know what I mean? Yes, there were all my friends were the counselors, that weren't paying attention when Jason got drowned as a kid. But I went home 2 weeks before because I got the measles or something like that. So it's like, why Mama Voorhees is coming after me now for like, yeah, blame it on the damn counselor kids. That wasn't me. Like if I was part of it, and that's what that kind of reminded me. It was like this kind of thing like that. But then like I said, she's trying to find her kid the whole entire time. She's going crazy. She's finding all these facts. There's all these little, the kids. Basically, she finds out that these kids are buried in their basement and finds their skulls, and they're
John Wayne Gacy style, dude.
yeah, they're trying to help her out, and they're trying to do things, and that's when she kind of uncovers things and realizes that when they were doing this, they had this little open house party and thing like that, that this kid, that we thought was possibly a ghost because it was dressed up in the old attire of the kids that were at the orphanage, kind of goes ape wall crazy on the mom, pushes, slams the door on her arm, on her finger, and crushes, like mashes up her fingers all, pushes her into the sink and runs away. And then, like I said, the kid's in the missing, so she's trying to figure out. She thinks these ghosts are the reason why, and everyone's like, "Yeah, unfortunately, this is the real world, and
Yeah.
ghosts don't kidnap kids." And there was, like I said, the whole entire time you're like, but no, you're seeing all this shit go around. So you're kind of you're kind of believing her too. Like, okay, are these kids kind of playing revenge on her because they got killed because they did a prank and blah 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 blah. Even though, like I said, she wasn't even there, and then like that, and you're like, you go and you find out, and then like eventually, whenever you're finding her out, she's finding out stuff. She's finding little places. She goes into the closet and realizes there's like there's like a section where you can go into like another part of the house and go into like this secret cubby hole in the basement thingy and kind of thing. And that's when she finds the corpse of her dead son, that apparently when he found out about this secret cubby hole, which he probably found out because of the ghost, because that's where the kids were all buried at. And when she finds them and then things like that, you go in and he's playing this prank on his mom, and she's getting all mad, and she slams the door, and a piece of wood clamps on this door that you don't know because it's a secret door. So they're going around trying to find this kid, and they can't find him anywhere. They're like, I don't know where he is. The cops are coming in, they're searching the house. But like I said, when you go into this closet, you don't even realize that you just think it's just the wall, and it's
Yeah.
actually the door. And then that's what it was basically, the whole entire time that she's birth, it's saying like 6 months later. So I can imagine, the kid looks pretty jacked up. You don't see very well, but I could just imagine the smell, because this kid that basically starved to death because he was locked inside of this basement, and she kept on hearing all these noises, but figure these noises and banging were either, house pains, or the fact that she kept on thinking about these ghosts, thinking about if that was them, and not realizing that it was her son the whole entire time. And basically, he ended up passing from just being malnourished and not being able to eat, and ever how many months, he eventually passes away. And she goes into a crazy kind of fit, like she has a motherly excursion.
Yep. No, 100%. And it's crazy with all of that too, because ultimately that leads towards the finale where she's having this fit. She's like, and she has this like, this pill situation where it's like, I need to I need to medicate. I need to feel this. And that's what is also part of what ties it into a little bit of that like Silent Hill feel, is for any of the Fangs and Infernos that are familiar with the end of Silent Hill, where you have this kind of like living on two planes situation where it shows like, the strangely enough, the mother and child like lying on the couch, relaxing in their house. The husband is walking through the door, coming into the same house, and it's all completely empty. There's no one on the couch, there's nobody there. In that case, everyone's alive, but it's two completely different universes, it's two completely different planes. In this situation, you find out that the child that, every time she saw her son, and every time that she saw the, you know, the children, she'd be wanting to find them, trying to fill in the gaps, play hide and seek, like ultimately solve the puzzle. But it wasn't until she actually found her son, thinking he was alive, but realizing that he was dead. But what made you come together and go like, wait, he was never alive. She only found him alive because she's no longer alive. And that's the part that I thought was a really, really great twist at the end, was realizing that this self-medication that she did wasn't just for the sake of stress, anxiety, worry, XYZ, ABC. It was that no, she came to the realization that she needs to go to that side, and it was actually a suicide that led to that, which I thought was really crazy, but a really well designed execution of the end of the movie for her to be reunited with her child, be reunited ultimately with this orphanage that she loved so much, with the husband kind of realizing that she needed to do this. And it was kind of a peaceful thing that she felt she had to do. And again, it's this very bizarre aspect of like, well, was he supportive or was he just a dick? Sometimes it's a little more complicated than that. And I always just kind of really dug the way that the orphanage did it.
Yeah, yeah, and the ending to me it was very like to me it was very like I even put that in our notes. It's very Peter Pan. You
Very
know what I mean?
much.
Very Peter Pan story. Obviously, the Lost Boys and there's theories of the reason why these kids don't grow up in Neverland is the fact that they've all been dead. They're all dead. That's why they never grew up. And Wendy, grows up and becomes an old lady and obviously everybody knows that story where, yeah, where it's at the very end, yeah, she was a kid with all them, and now that they're all ghosts, those kids are still all young kids, but older. She's Wendy as an older now, so
Yeah.
now she's taking care of all these kids, and it had that kind of feel like that
Yeah.
little Peter Pan kind of feel towards the end of it, and I thought it was pretty cool. I thought that with that kind of like with the kids and her going together, I thought that was kind of a cool ending where it was like, even though, like I said, even though she felt responsible for the loss of her son, she knew that taking her own life that in this world that there, or at least in this orphanage, there's some kind of power, some kind of other dimension, and that she can live on
Yeah.
with her son and take care of the kids, her best friends, the kids. And that's where it was kind of like, even at the end they were just like, hey, it's but they say her name and they're like, oh God, yeah, it is her, and they all start coming out and going, oh yeah, yeah, kind of like I said, very Peter Pan. Oh, it is Pan. You
Yeah.
Pan's grown up. So I thought that was a
Yeah.
cool. I thought that was a
Oh,
cool
there
ending.
you are, Peter.
Yeah, there you are, Peter. Kind of had that kind of feel to it. You know what I mean? So I thought it was kind of cool. That was a cool ending to like I said, it's it's definitely a very tragic story, especially because, like I said, they're looking for their kid for all these months and months and months, and he's literally downstairs, trying to survive and banging himself around, trying to make noise, trying to be found, but and unfortunately doesn't get found. And then, like I said, he joins them in the hunt, and they that like you said, they played all the games that they were playing to kind of get her the clues that she needs to do all the stuff. So I thought that was I thought it was a cool movie. I like the visual. It's definitely, like I said, you can definitely tell, that's the reason why Del Toro, put this movie out, was because, or produced it, just because it's very story driven, and it's very, it's one of those ones that's like it's intriguing. And at the time, I think until Pan's Labyrinth or something like that, it was one of the biggest films, like, in Spain for, for a while. It was like, at least in like the horror science fiction realm.
Yeah, for sure. Until Doug Jones
Yeah.
got his hands into things with Pan's Labyrinth. No, for sure. Absolutely, brother. It was definitely a cool one, man. I really, really enjoyed this movie. I thought this was a great pick by you. So, talking about the obituaries and then ultimately leading to how we want to score the showdown, how do you look at the orphanage?
I mean, to me, like I said, I mean, I would never go as far as saying it's a highly huge movie. I mean, as far as like, like I'm not gonna give it some even though in my heart I'd like to give it an astronomical, number for, for it. But like, ideally, yeah, it's one of those ones that unless you are a fan of Del Toro's films and you kind of go, oh, it's just got Del Toro's name kind of into it, like even like the cabinets and curiosity that he kind of came out and presented. It's one of those ones, like, if you're a fan of his films, you'll go, oh, let me see what else he directed. Okay, he directed all these. I've seen all these. Okay, what does he produce? What movies did he put his name or his stamp on? You're really not going to know. Too many people are not going to know about this movie until you get to possibly the remake that came in America called The Uninvited. And it's one of those ones where, like, you could have watched that. I mean, I've done that before with a film I watched. I can't remember the name of the movie right now, and now I'm trying to remember the premise of it. But anyway, I remember, oh, it was that one where the guy's out. Oh, it just came out a couple years ago. But the guy's in the cabin and things like that. But it's a foreigner, and they're visiting these people, and these people go, "Oh, come to my house," and they come to the house, and they find out that the son isn't really their son. They've kidnapped him. And I remember watching like watching the American one, and I'm like, this looks familiar. I've seen this before. And it's kind of like one of those ones with Uninvited where,
Yeah.
you can watch that and be like, wait, this reminds me of something. And then you go back and see like, oh yeah, I forgot that's a remake of, the Orphanage. So I thought that was I thought that was it's a cool movie. Like I said, I've always liked the concept. Um, Unfortunately, if you don't have it on DVD, it's really, really hard to find a subtitled version of it. I found it on Amazon for $5, so I was like, hell yeah, I'm buying $5 because I know about one or two words in Spanish, and that's about it. So I can deal with, like, when we talked about movies like Who Can Kill a Child, that has a little bit of that English and that, and it had the Spanish in a little bit, but it was in it a little bit that
Wasn't fluent.
you can still kind of figure out what's going on. Where this whole entire movie, if you had to watch it in Spanish and you don't know any Spanish, you're not going to know what the shit's going on. This movie is going to be the most confusing movie in the entire world. You're going to be like, what the hell? So, I mean, like I said, overall, like I said, I've always been like I said, I was a fan of this movie. I think it's really cool. I do love the imagery. I love the storyline of it. I love just the visuals of it, and I like the ending. I thought the ending was really, really cool. I like that, that kind of like, that Peter Pan, kind of feel to it. So for me, I'm gonna have to give it a 7.5.
No, no worries, Devil. And I'm definitely honestly with you on that one. And I'm just gonna kind of like say my piece and then segue it right into the scores because I think I have a solid mental on where the proper scorings go for this. So yeah, I see it right there with you at a 7.5. I think it's great. I think it's a solid movie. Really stoked that you picked it. And I was really happy that I've been familiar with it forever. Got copies of The Uninvited, both the Uninvited that's based off of this, and then also the Criterion Uninvited that has nothing to do with the American Uninvited.
Yeah.
It's just the same title, but the movies have nothing to do with each other. But of course, my buddy Goolsby from Blitzkid, he's done a couple of songs called The Uninvited. He's done a song called The Uninvited. So anything that's titled The Uninvited is always going to grab my attention. But I do like the execution. I like the story. I think, the combination of like kills, but mixed with why they're happening, mixed with along with the curiosities, like when the older lady was taken away, was a very very unique design and a very very interesting concept. Overall, I like the way it is. It definitely, yeah, you definitely do need that subtitle aspect if you don't speak Spanish, which does give a little bit more benefit to A Tale of Two Sisters, and that it's a little bit easier to understand and comprehend because it's designed to be able to translate for you while you're watching. So there are a little bit more marks for a foreign person watching this movie in A Tale of Two Sisters. It's a little tougher when it comes to the orphanage. But overall, I like the story that the orphanage is portraying and I like the execution of it. And so I personally do see the two movies at a 7.5 because of the way that the movies are portrayed and executed. And again, I have a little bit more, based on previous and current brides that have turned me casually onto that world where I still may not be a fan, but I recognize things a little different than others. But the width that comes to the orphanage, I really love that story, the intricacies of the layers of like the sandwich, so to speak. And ultimately, when it gets to the end, and I love your interpretation of the Peter Pan syndrome. I think that's really cool. So I know that you score the movies at a 7.5 to a 7. I score the movies at an even 7.5. But this is kind of how I see it overall, with the combination of the orphanage sticking also a little closer to the category. And while I don't think my pick at A Tale of Two Sisters is incorrect, there's a little bit more of the strength behind the orphanage is the solidity of the overall story, is something that has to be brought into the conversation when it comes to the overall scoring of things. So while we clearly score Orphanage at a 7.5 and then technically score A Tale of Two Sisters at a 7.25, which does give you the win and will give you the win, that's just not something that we do here. But I do think a solid 7.5 for Orphanage to a 7.0, like you were saying, for A Tale of Two Sisters, is solid for the overall page for here. Because while I do love the story and I love that damn sure unique design of shooting it backwards, it's not going to translate unless you're picking up things, or in the case of watching the director's interview, it's told to you.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. Like I said, I mean, it's weird when it comes to it too, because like you said, if you go into that criteria of ghost stories or even haunted house horror films, you don't even have to put haunted house foreign horror films. You just put
Yeah,
haunted house films. Tale of Two Sisters is on there, and like I said, it's definitely has that feel of the haunted house
yeah,
with the like the hand coming out of things and figures going around and stuff like that. But ultimately, yeah, those are kind of quote unquote ghosts, but they're not really ghosts because they're all figment of this girl's imagination. They're all in her, in her mental disorder that she has. Where at least in the orphanage, they're actual ghosts. These kids are ghosts. They're playing the games with the girl, and then the woman, the mother, ultimately at the very end, becoming a ghost with the kids. So yeah,
yeah.
I mean,
And the sister's house is kind of irrelevant to the
yeah.
story.
Yeah, yeah, because I mean, it's more like you're not even 100% sure whether or not the house is really even in the movie the whole entire time. Because I've seen some theories that the whole movie is just her in the asylum because she
Yeah.
starts in the asylum, she ends in the asylum. Did she ever get out of the asylum to begin with? So the whole entire time the movie could be just in the asylum.
Yeah,
You
which
wouldn't
could
see.
technically make it a haunted asylum. So it's still in the ballpark, but that's a really excellent point.
Yeah. So I mean, I definitely agree. I think if we're gonna give one the extra bump, you know what I mean, we'll definitely go with the orphanage. I think people probably maybe have seen Tale of the Two Sisters, maybe a little that as far as edging wise, people will probably have maybe have heard of that one a little bit more just because the explosion of the Korean horror film, and that is already gone. So people have already like, oh yeah, dude, I love this movie, I love that movie. So you have looked into it where to find the orphanage, you have to just. I think the only way you're finding that is if you're finding Del Toro and you're looking more into him. I mean, you can also look ghost movies and things like that because that's obviously on the list too. And you could be like, oh, okay, I've never seen this one. Then you, like I said, but that's that. But it's going to draw you to the orphanage is Del Toro's name on it, so you're going to be like, oh, sweet. So I think a little bit of that. So I mean, yeah, I'm cool with
A little,
I'm cool
little
with
bit
the
of star power.
ratings.
Absolutely. Yeah, a little bit of extra star power when it comes to that for sure. So Fangs and Infernos, that's the way it's going to be. It's going to be victory to the devil on haunted houses as Orphanage at a 7.5 takes out A Tale of Two Sisters at a 7.0. We appreciate everything that you guys do when it comes to showing myself and the devil all of the love and respect when it comes to how we like to execute this show and do our showdowns, especially because you guys get involved in so many of the other aspects of what makes this show great. But if you like to look ever so suave and sophisticated and your gothy darky selves, please make sure that you're checking out our friends and Mark and Lizzie over at Rockin' Horror Apparel. They are the ones that take care of all of the Vampire and Devil podcast merch. So go over to rocknhorror.com, go down to the Vampire and Devil collab category, and you will find all of our merch. If you like to spill the tea, check out our friends at Brutalities. And of course, make sure that you guys are showing our friend Chris over at the Buffalo Bill House a lot of love. It's now a bed and breakfast, but it's so incredible with the way it's got all of the original stuff left over from the filming of Silence of the Lambs. So many cool stuff with all these great aspects. And as of the recording, we are in October and we know you love your spooky decor. So definitely make sure that you guys are checking out our friends over at Twisted Vines for all your Ouija boards and creepy decor needs. We love Chris, we love Saren and everything that they're doing. And there's so many other amazing partners that you guys can check out by going over to the Vampire and Devil Podcast Facebook, Instagram, and checking out all of the people that are involved with our show. That's the way it's going to be. Again, on behalf of the devil, he takes the victory today. Again, 7.5 for the Orphanage, 7.0 for A Tale of Two Sisters, and we will be back for some more good times and creepy fun. See you soon. Horns up. Fangs out. Devil, my friend.
Oh yeah.
I think if there's anybody who would know hot things, it's you.
Oh yeah.
So I think it's only right that you let our beloved Fangs know what they can order now, courtesy of Coney Island.
Oh yeah, man. We're in the kitchen. You know it gets hot in the kitchen. And what else better for your finger foods, for your tacos, for your victims that you may be eating? Maybe some sauce. And you should get it from the sauce boss. Coney Island sauce. Oh yeah. Get some of that good stuff. Oh yeah. You like to sprinkle it on anything. You could sprinkle it on your fingers. Sprinkle it on your toes. Sprinkle it on your hose. Anything you want to sprinkle goes.
Absolutely. We have partnered with Coney Island Saucery. Aaron is fantastic. We really appreciate all the love he's given to the show, and we're very, very pleased and honored to be a part of him. So he's got 4 sauces out of various heat levels to enjoy on all your various foods, but also for anybody who is already following his socials, our socials, or is about to be, newly announced partnership with Slayer.
Slayer, oh yeah.
Coney Island
burning to fire.
Oh yeah, Coney Island Saucery does have a Slayer brand hot sauce coming out very, very soon. And so make sure that you check that out for all your various levels of spice. This is Vampire and the Devil, Coney Island Saucery. Horns up. Fangs out. All right there, Fangs and Infernos. Got a fresh coffin nails for us. It also felt incredibly apropos to talk a little bit about this one, considering that myself and the devil recently covered a horror con that involves an actress of this movie, in the great Caroline Williams.
So let's talk a little bit about 10 Minutes to Midnight. I actually quite fancied this movie. I thought it was a whole lot of fun. Great soundtrack. Of course, if anybody's familiar with who Carolyn Williams is, as far as like outside of film, she's a big fan and friend of Wednesday 13. Myself and Devil are big fans and friends of Wednesday 13. So it's kind of a cool little family affair. But anyway, his music was involved in the movie. She's wearing a Murder Dolls t-shirt for the whole movie, you know, super duper cool. But basically it's about a radio DJ who works the graveyard shift, who's basically about to get off of, who's about to retire. You know, she's it's her last graveyard shift. She gets bit in the neck by a rabid bat and starts turning her into a vampire. But it's got this very cool kind of like psychedelic feel to the movie. That's one of the things I actually really liked about it. It's actually very kind of Rob Zombie-esque with a lot of the way this was. You know, she's kind of like hallucinating. She can't really decide on who she's talking to and why. Is the new pretty little thing that's going to take her job, you know, got a relationship with her boss, kind of like they did back when she got started, you know, a whole lot of different kind of intricacies, you know, trying to stay friends with like her, like kind of like co-host kind of guy who like, you know, monitors the phone lines. And just kind of understand, like, is it just time to leave? But then there's this giant thunderstorm that keeps everybody trapped in the radio station as she's turning into the vampire and going through all these changes and all these hallucinogens. And then I love the way that it ended with this kind of very Devil's Rejects, just blood-soaked room being discovered by somebody who comes in the morning with a creature, you know, hiding in the corner that ends with a blackout screen to leave it a little bit up to your imagination of what may or may not have happened to that guy. But overall, it was a whole lot of fun. I really enjoyed this movie. I'm going to go high with it. I'm going to give it a good 7.5 for 10 Minutes to Midnight with Carolyn Williams. It's a great time. Go check it out. Vampire approves.
Ghouls and Fangs. Vampire and the Devil here. We got a little question for you. Devil, there's kind of a triangle, a three-headed monster per se, when it comes to Baltimore, that I don't think people necessarily realize. We've got Edgar Allan Poe. We've got John Waters. But what else do we have?
We got the Ouija boards, oh yeah.
Absolutely. Starting in Baltimore way back in the day, a lot of people are unfamiliar with William Fuld and Elijah Bond, who patented, and the birth of the Ouija board was right here in Baltimore. Devil and Vampire coming at you from the Witchboard Museum of Baltimore, courtesy of our friend John Kozik, who invited us out to check it out and shoot a little conversation action to let you guys all know. Of course, you've seen on our socials that we have partnered with both museums, and we couldn't be more appreciative to John for that opportunity. So whenever you're here in Baltimore, of course, right attached to the Bazaar Oddity Shop off of the Avenue, you have Witchboard Museum Baltimore. And when you're in Witch City, USA, up in Salem, Massachusetts, that's when you get to visit the Salem Witchboard Museum.
Oh yeah, if you want to see some cool stuff, see some cool boards, get some cool history, go see our boy John. Man, that guy is really awesome, man. That dude knows his boards, he knows his history. He's about preserving the society of witch boards and the talking boards and all that goodness. And, you know, we love it. We love the fact that, you know, they were going to bring in this museum here in Baltimore. So all the Baltimore fans or all your East Coast fans or maybe not as far away, going up to Salem, come out to Baltimore and check it out, you know what I mean? Because there's some cool stuff in this museum, and you got to check it out because the devil and the vampire said so.
That is facts right there, my friend. Again, absolutely attached to the Bazaar Oddities shop in the Avenue in Hamden for the Baltimore established Witchboard Museum, or off of Essex Street in Salem, Massachusetts for the Salem Witchboard Museum. Horns up, fangs out.